Garp throwing down with Aokiji really made me think, is Garp stronger than Luffy? Now I know we all want to resist that theory. How could our main character not be stronger than his old grandfather yet? There is some very solid reason to believe that Garp is stronger than Luffy, but definitely comparable too. I'm gonna get into all the reasons, all of the evidence, and all the power scaling that we know can be pretty fluid in One Piece. As we know, the writer chooses who wins at the end of the day, but there could be some reasons to prove otherwise. Let's get into the Garp details. For one, the big point I want to move towards and that everyone alludes to when scaling Garp, and what honestly makes him really hard to scale, is the fact the way Garp was talking at Marineford and the way Sengoku was acting during Marineford really seemed as though when Garp said he was going to kill Akainu, it did not seem like he was joking, and it seemed like he really thought he could kill Akainu, and Sengoku really thought he could kill Akainu. Now, we have to go into the circumstances there too. There could have been a reason why Sengoku might have stopped Garp, mainly because he knew if Garp did attack Akainu that the entire Marines would turn on him. That is definitely a solid point and a solid point of contention to have for that argument, and if there wasn't any other evidence, it probably would be a pretty baseless claim to claim that Garp is stronger than really anybody at that point. We hadn't really seen him fight at all. But I do believe though that Garp was being serious, especially considering the fact that I don't think he would just make that baseless claim, and honestly, I think if he didn't have a chance of killing Akainu, I don't even think he would have really hesitated, or Sengoku would have hesitated, because we saw Kobe stand up to Akainu too, as well as the fact that Garp has that deep background within the Marines, that would make it a pretty reasonable statement for him to step up to Akainu in that moment and really put his foot down. Everyone there knows the circumstances of his relationship with Luffy, so it would have made perfect sense for him to step up to Akainu after basically trying to kill his two grandkids and successfully killing one of them. One of the things that also makes it a little hard to scale Garp is that he's of the role of Vice Admiral, but it's pretty obvious and clear and clearly stated throughout the entire story that Garp could have been an admiral if he wanted to, he just didn't want the position. Now, we really don't get much scaling for Garp for a really long time, really nothing sufficient until right now. So what we have here is Garp is fighting and he has a giant galaxy fist that he drops down on the Skull Island. And I know Oda rescaled it a bit, but it's still a giant galaxy fist at the end of the day. And now what's really important and where we're really going to get into the meat of this argument is the fact that he is throwing down with Aokiji on a very even level. And honestly, most people think he's beating Aokiji at this moment in the fight. Now, Aokiji is definitely not going his full 100. But if him and Garp is even a remotely close fight, like let's say Aokiji barely beats Garp, I think you could confidently say that Garp is probably pretty similar to Luffy at this point. Now, the scaling of the Admirals is pretty much up to complete speculation at this point, right? Because we see the Admirals have some crazy feats, fighting for 3 days, clearing out some huge names and huge enemies. But at the end of the day, too, you have to think in the context of the One Piece world, the Admirals are probably not the stronger than the Yonko, because if the Admirals were stronger than the Yonko, why would the Yonko exist in the first place? I do think the Admirals are comparable to Luffy, because one, Luffy is the newest Emperor, and two, he's probably the weakest Emperor, to be honest, because we saw that he literally took 5 tries to beat Kaido. Is Luffy really Yonko level in that tier? Probably, but just like I said, just barely. So I think those bottom end Yonko are definitely comparable to the Admirals in that regard. So I do think though that we need to see the conclusion of this fight to really get a full understanding of where Garp is at. But I think just the fact that the fight is happening shows that Garp is at least comparable to an Admiral, and if not stronger than the Admiral, a little bit below. Now let's talk a little bit more about Luffy. As I just said, it did take him 5 tries to beat Kaido, so it's like, do you scale him to how he finished the fight, or how many tries it took? Because there was a lot of special circumstances there that allowed him to get a numerous amount of tries. Now, at the same time though, when Luffy entered Gear 5, we don't know if he would have had that at the start of the fight if he would have successfully beat Kaido at the start. But Kaido was fighting floods of enemies and many different sets of enemies too during that time. So you could definitely say that at the point of Luffy beating him, he definitely wouldn't have been able to beat a Kaido at 100%. Now, another thing though to scale in favor of Luffy is the fact that when Green Bull pulled up to Wano, it really didn't seem like Luffy had any concern for him whatsoever. You can attribute this to character traits and just how Luffy is. Like, he's not going to stress over anyone, much less Green Bull. but he was completely casual in his approach and didn't even seem to be that worried for Momo, as he had Yamato there as well. You can use that as evidence in support of Luffy, but like I was saying, just like with the Garp thing, there's some special circumstances there that makes it a pretty hard discussion to have. But I do think you can confidently say though, that Luffy and Garp are a little bit equal, or one is slightly above the other right now. I do think if we see an Egghead Luffy versus Kizaru, we're going to be able to confidently say if Luffy is of Admiral level or not. And now I'm going to tell you what I think. So we've gone over the details, and what I think is this. Luffy and Garp are pretty hard to scale against each other, but I do think the fact that they're both fighting similar levels of enemies shows that they're comparable level. So if I did have to choose though, which one is slightly stronger than the other, just off pure strength, I would say Luffy. But honestly, there's other factors that go into a fight, and we don't know what level of hockey Garp is at. I think we can assume that he was of the highest at his prime, but I don't know if we can say that anymore. But I think Luffy is stronger than this current version of Garp barely, but I don't think he touches Garp's peak right now. As we know, Garp was throwing down on God Valley with all the rest of them. He was the one that fought Roger constantly, and I don't think Luffy is there yet. Obviously, at the end of the story, he will get there. I do think Luffy would get washed by Prime Garp, and I think him versus current Garp, he probably edges out that fight off pure strength. And I'm sure in the future chapters, we're going to get to see more of the downfalls of Garp and his age, because we already saw him alluding to it in the chapter that he doesn't feel the same. One thing I do want to note, I do think Garp is stronger than Law and Kid. I think you can confidently say that after seeing both of them lose. Law vs Blackbeard seemed like it was a pretty competitive fight that Blackbeard didn't edge him out in, but beat him with a very hard difficulty, and Shanks vs Kid was a wash. So I think you can easily say that Garp is stronger than Kid at least. Kid and Law had to power up, they had to awaken their devil fruits in order to beat Big Mom, and I don't know if you can confidently say that Law and Kid are Admiral level just yet either. So all in all, Garp is of Admiral level, and Luffy is also of Admiral level. Where Garp and Luffy are on that line and on that scale is pretty hard to judge at the moment. And like I was saying in the beginning of the video, Oda chooses who wins in the end. I do think we're going to conclude that Garp is slightly weaker than Admiral. Even though Garp has the upper hand in the fight right now, I do think by the end of it, we're going to confidently say that Garp, at his current point, is a little bit less than an Admiral, but he can still throw down, and that cannot be taken away from him at all, because Garp and that Galaxy Fist was one of the coolest moves we ever saw in the entirety of the series. Now, that's all I have for you guys today. It was a pretty nice speculative video that I think we have some base and evidence for, and I think it's something we might revisit in the future. So if you enjoyed the video, please drop a like. We're just getting started. I'll stay consistent, and I will see you guys in the next video.